Hi everyone, my name is Marek Oziewicz. This is a lightning talk. What does it mean for a book to be about climate change? Literature is an art of representation. In the field of children's literature, some of the fiercest cultural debates of the past 2 decades have been about who is being represented or not, by whom and how. Questions of identity, inclusion, perspective, and cultural authenticity have been at the forefront, and rightly so. As this discussion was unfolding, however, operations of the global ecocidal civilization have blown our world past 4 of the 9 planetary boundaries that define safe operational space for human species on our mother planet. How do we address the larger challenge of climate change without losing focus on the social and cultural debates developed so far? How can children's literature be a tool for this effort? And what does it mean for a book to be about climate change? This lightning talk will offer a framework for considering these questions. Specifically, my suggestion is that one challenge for pedagogy in the Anthropocene, a particular challenge for literary scholars and educators, will be to identify strategies to creatively employ narratives that are not explicitly about climate change for the explicit purpose of climate literacy education. Given time limitations, I will not repeat the many and detailed arguments on why and how children's literature is essential for raising a climate literate generation, for engaging young people in discussions about the complexities of climate change in its social, economic, political, cultural, and other impacts. This argument can be found in a host of recent publications, including the special issue of The Lion and the Unicorn I co-edited with Lara Sagisak. There's a couple of other books that are included here that also develop this discussion. My departure point is the 3 core assumptions at the heart of Climate Lit, an online resource hub for teaching climate literacy with children's literature and media. 1. That addressing climate change is primarily a challenge for our imaginations and story systems. So in other words, that climate literacy is a narrative competence, one that includes an understanding of facts and numbers, but centers developing values and attitudes aligned with how we should live to respect our planetary home. 2. That teaching about climate change should be at the heart of our educational practice, that centering discussions about issues of climate change in all subject areas and at all grade levels is the most meaningful action we can take to empower young people to become agents of change. And the 3rd assumption is that children's and young adult literature is ground zero for building universal climate literacy. So literature, film, art, and other narrative forms for this audience are not additional, but the most important avenues for raising climate awareness and mobilizing climate action. This is a helpful framework, I think, but it's only the first step. What awaits us then is a series of practical pedagogical challenges of implementation. And one of them is to define specific competences that comprise climate literacy. Based on these competences, one can then design frameworks for building these competences with stories for specific age groups, or maybe even in specific subject areas. There is more, of course. But one practical question is what it means for a book to be about climate change. And I've organized my thoughts on this into 2 points, each with related comments. First, I want to suggest that we have preciously few books about climate change, and let's call them conditionally climate narratives, as opposed to environmental literature, sci-fi, eco-fiction, and others. I think that literature is a slow-moving cultural system, and it will take about 10, maybe 15 years before we see a rich variety of books that are specifically and explicitly about climate change. At this point, we only have a handful. But this comes with caveats. So this relative lack of climate narratives is a separate issue from the question what it means for a book to be about climate change, because people have very different ideas on this point. And it's also a separate issue from a more theoretical question of how books mean in general. And we have this common notion that books are about something. And it's not incorrect, but it's quite problematic too. And one insight I have found helpful navigating these complexities is the focus on moments within a book. And this is a strategy that Joe Sutcliffe-Sanders proposed in A Literature of Questions. And while Sutcliffe-Sanders examines critical engagement with nonfiction, the point he makes about narratives as plural entities engaged in multiplicity of sometimes contradictory goals appears to be valid for other narrative forms. So, from a functionalist perspective, even one episode in the book that engages with climate change directly or creates a portal into discussions about climate change, even this one episode is an opportunity for climate literacy education. So one example of a climate narrative is The Tantrum That Saved the World by Megan Herbert and Michael E. Mann. The book tells the story of a child character interacting with human and non-human victims of climate change disruptions, learning from their stories, engaging in youth climate activism, and becoming a leader in a collective process of transformation that heads in the direction of becoming an ecological civilization, which is the happy ending in this book, when all climate refugees returned home to their environments. Another good example of a climate narrative is John Sheshka and Steven Weinberg's Astronauts, Mission 1, The Planned Planet. It's a graphic novel. Actually, the entire series is a great example. This book tells of adventures of 4 animal mutant superheroes created by not NASA, Earth's secret agency that kicks into action when the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere crosses the big red line of 400 ppm. While the adventure happens in space, the book is about the uniqueness of the complexity of life on Earth. It is narrated by Earth, who leads the story into space to communicate the urgency of climate action on the only home planet that we have. And this book does not offer solutions the way that Tantrum does, but it centers climate change as an existential emergency that requires action now. So these are the 2 examples. My second point is that we already have a much larger number of books that are not about climate change, but they offer a way into productive discussions about it. Functionally, they can be called portal narratives. They help us explore how climate change intersects with environmental, social, economic, cultural, and other issues facing our world today. Some of the examples include books like Elliot Schrafer's Threatened, Nicole Helget's The End of the Wild, Jeff Rodke's We're Not From Here, and none of them is about climate change. Yet each offers essential entry points for understanding complex links between the book's themes and climate change as a larger process. And by essential entry points, I mean that the context of various developments included under the umbrella term climate change provides a key framework without which our understanding of the book's themes is simply incomplete. Threatened tells the story of a teenage orphan Luke who becomes involved in studying and protecting endangered chimpanzees in their habitat in Gabon. It's a story about the complexities of animal conservation in Africa. The End of the Wild, set in an unspecified U.S. location, follows 12-year-old Fern as she grapples with her local community's struggles to accept or resist a new fracking site. Helget's novel offers a great insight on how the need for jobs, especially in impoverished communities, works against legitimate concerns about the environmental cost to animal, plant, and human life during and after the mining operation. Rodke's We're Not From Here, finally, tells a story of human evacuees from a destroyed Earth. It raises questions about how the planet was made uninhabitable, who was responsible for the destruction, and who gets to be rescued. The challenges of animal conservation, the impact of extractive industries, and accountability for ecocide are distinct issues. Each deserves attention on their own. That said, each of these issues is also a strand in a larger cluster of processes entangled with or driving climate change. As you review the history of debates about cultural authenticity, debates about what counts as books by and about marginalized or minority people, it appears that it will take much more discussion to agree, if at all, on what it means for a book to be about climate change. As this discussion accelerates and as authors come up with new stories, our climate pedagogy will need to rely both on climate narratives and on portal narratives. It will need to rely on moments in a story rather on the entire narrative, and it will need to rely, perhaps most significantly, on how creative we are in raising climate literacy concerns through any narratives we use. Thank you.